Imagine standing in a stone chamber where your breath turns to fog the moment it leaves your lips. The walls sweat with ice, metal gleams with frost, and in the corner of this frozen hell sits something that looks almost like a statue, tall, narrow, shaped vaguely like a human figure. But when you get closer, you see what's inside. Iron spikes. Dozens of them, pointing inward from every angle. This is the Iron Maiden, and what it does to the human body will make you grateful you were born in the 21st century. Medieval Europe didn't just punish criminals, it turned punishment into an art form, a theater of suffering designed to break not just bodies, but entire communities' will to resist authority. And during the brutal winters when rivers froze solid and villages buried their dead in snow, these torture devices became even more horrific. Because cold metal against bare skin doesn't just hurt, it burns, it sticks, it tears flesh when you're pulled away from it. Tonight, we're descending into 5 of history's most nightmarish torture devices. Each one was designed with surgical precision to maximize suffering while keeping the victim alive as long as possible. These weren't tools of quick execution, they were instruments of slow destruction, and the winter cold made every second of agony stretch into an eternity. By the end of this video, you'll understand why medieval people feared these devices more than death itself. Because sometimes, dying quickly was a mercy they were never granted. The Iron Maiden stands as one of the most recognizable symbols of medieval cruelty, though its true origins remain wrapped in layers of fear and myth. This coffin-like device was designed as a sarcophagus tall enough to hold a standing adult, narrow enough that movement was impossible. Inside, iron spikes lined both the door and back panel, positioned with calculated precision to pierce critical but non-lethal parts of the body: the eyes, the arms, the legs, the genitals. Victims were enclosed slowly, and here's where the genius of evil reveals itself. The spikes weren't positioned to kill immediately. They were arranged to pierce just deep enough to cause maximum pain while avoiding major arteries. When the doors shut in the dead of winter, those iron spikes were cold enough to freeze flesh on contact before they pierced through. Every breath became agony. Every involuntary muscle spasm drove the spikes deeper. Though most physical examples date to the late 18th century, particularly the infamous model in Nuremberg, Germany, the psychological terror of the Iron Maiden was entirely consistent with medieval punishment philosophy. This wasn't just about causing pain. It was about creating a spectacle that would terrorize entire populations into submission. The chronicler Johann Philipp Siebenkees described it in gruesome detail in 1793, though modern historians debate whether his account was based on real devices or earlier, more primitive torture methods adapted for maximum horror. But here's what we know for certain. During the Inquisition and under the Holy Roman Empire, torture wasn't just permitted, it was institutionalized, refined, turned into a science. And the Iron Maiden, whether widely used or not, embodied a terrifying truth about that era. Silence wasn't merely enforced through threats or imprisonment, it was embedded into the very mechanics of suffering. The Iron Maiden may never have seen widespread medieval use in its final form, but the fear it embodies comes from very real historical practices. The church and secular authorities sanctioned methods designed to achieve not just confession, but total submission, complete erasure of the human will through instruments specifically engineered for that purpose. Can you imagine being locked inside? The cold metal pressing against your skin from all sides, the spikes touching you in dozens of places simultaneously, not quite piercing yet, but threatening to with every breath. You can't move. You can't scream without driving spikes into your jaw. You can't even breathe deeply. And in winter, hypothermia would set in within hours, your body shaking uncontrollably, each shiver forcing you onto those frozen spikes. The psychological component was just as calculated as the physical design. Victims could hear everything happening outside their metal prison guards talking, other prisoners screaming, the ordinary sounds of life continuing while they suffered in total darkness. Time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days, and death, when it finally came from blood loss or exposure or simply shock, arrived too slowly. But if you think the Iron Maiden represents the peak of medieval cruelty, wait until you hear about the device that pulled the human body apart, joint by joint, while keeping the victim fully conscious throughout the entire process. The rack was deceptively simple in design, a rectangular wooden frame fitted with rollers at both ends. But this simplicity masked a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and exactly how to destroy it. The accused would be bound by wrists and ankles to these rollers. Then the executioner would begin turning the handles. With each rotation, the limbs were pulled farther apart, creating strain that built gradually from discomfort to unbearable agony. The shoulders dislocated first. You'd hear the papa sound that echoed off stone walls and haunted everyone who witnessed it. Then came the hips, the knees, the elbows. Joints were forced beyond their natural limits while the victim remained fully conscious, feeling every tendon stretch beyond its breaking point, every ligament tear slowly apart. The rack wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was designed to break a person down incrementally, physically shattered but still able to speak, still able to confess, still able to beg. Used extensively in England during the reigns of Edward I and the Tudor monarchs, the rack found its most infamous home in the Tower of London's Lower Wakefield Tower. It earned the darkly euphemistic nickname, the Duke of Exeter's Daughter, named after Thomas Exeter, who reportedly introduced this particular design to England in the early 15th century. It was used on both men and women, nobles and commoners, though heretics and political prisoners most frequently felt its grip. Winter made the rack infinitely worse. The cold contracted muscles and stiffened joints even before torture began. When your body was already rigid from cold, the pulling created compound fractures more easily. And when sessions ended, victims were often dragged back to unheated cells where their dislocated joints would freeze in their displaced positions. Guy Fawkes, the most famous conspirator in the 1605 gunpowder plot, experienced the rack firsthand. His confession signatures tell the entire story without words. The first attempt was an illegible scrawl, his hand so destroyed by torture he could barely hold the quill. His pain spoke through ink more clearly than any testimony could. Historical records show he was interrogated multiple times, and each session left him more broken than the last. The English jurist Sir Edward Coke remarked in 1603 with chilling honesty, "The law of England doth not allow torture. But in some cases, the king's command is obeyed." That single statement betrays everything, the fragile boundary between legal principle and brutal political reality. This wasn't about justice, it was about extraction. The rack was reserved for when words needed to be forced from sinew and bone, when confessions had to be manufactured through mechanical destruction of the human body. For many who survived their sessions on the rack, the suffering outlived the torture itself. Permanent paralysis was common. Lifelong chronic pain was guaranteed. Death by infection from dislocated joints often followed weeks or months later. Some victims reported that winter made the lingering effects worse. Their damaged joints would freeze up completely in cold weather, making every winter thereafter a reminder of what they'd endured. But perhaps no device better embodied the intersection of humiliation and physical agony than the next instrument, one that attacked the body's most vulnerable areas with surgical precision while stripping away every shred of human dignity. The Judas cradle was horrifying in its simplicity. A pyramidal wooden or metal spike mounted on a stand was placed beneath the victim. The individual, almost always stripped completely naked, would be suspended by ropes from the ceiling, then gradually lowered onto the point of the pyramid. But here's the crucial detail that made this device uniquely sadistic. The tip wasn't sharpened to penetrate cleanly. It was deliberately dulled, sometimes even slightly rounded. The agony came not from impalement, but from crushing pressure focused on the body's most sensitive areas, typically the anus, vagina, or perineum. Victims weren't dropped suddenly. They were suspended just above the tip, sometimes for hours, forced to watch as they were slowly, incrementally lowered. Their own body weight became the weapon. Any attempt to shift position, to relieve pressure on one side, only intensified the pain. Screaming caused the body to contract, driving them further onto the spike. Even breathing required calculations about how much movement the lungs could make without causing additional suffering. This could continue for hours, sometimes days. The victim was kept in this suspended state, hovering on the edge of unbearable pain, never quite given relief, never quite allowed to fully collapse onto the spike, and in winter, the metal or wooden point would be covered in frost. The initial contact would freeze sensitive tissue instantly. Imagine frostbite on your most vulnerable areas before the crushing pressure even begins. Records of the Judas cradle's specific use are sparse compared to more common devices like the rack, but mentions appear in connection to the Spanish Inquisition during the 15th and 16th centuries. What made this device particularly insidious was its dual purpose. It wasn't just about causing physical pain, it was about complete psychological destruction through humiliation, public nudity, exposure of the most private parts of the body, and the violation of bodily autonomy all compounded the physical suffering. It wasn't merely the body being punished, it was the soul being systematically degraded until nothing remained but compliance. The Malleus Maleficarum, a 1,487 manual for witch hunters and inquisitors, laid bare the mindset of the era with chilling directness. Torture is justified if the accused is obdurate or the evidence strong. The entire machinery of religious and political interrogation was built on such justifications, the belief that extracting confession, by any means necessary, served a higher purpose. Contemporary observers rarely left detailed accounts of the Judas cradle specifically, perhaps because the violation it represented was too extreme even for hardened medieval chroniclers. But the device's very existence reveals something profound about medieval punishment philosophy. Suffering wasn't just about pain, it was about breaking the person completely, about transforming human beings into obedient subjects through mechanisms that attacked dignity as aggressively as they attacked flesh.